Speaking of fun, the Stargirl's fun, but was it fun this week, Michael?
Very dark this week. Very dark. Um, uh, uh, I've said it many times. I will keep harping on about this. This is the first episode I have not seen via any screener. So last night was very much a like live watch for me, and it was it was very much at the halfway point now. This episode was less about the murder mystery, but also it's kind of like Nancy Drew, and then it's still played a huge role in the background, even if this episode was less about it. It was called Infinity Inc. Part One, and that's because of the characters it focused on. Last season, we met Green Lantern's daughter for the very first time. Jennie is her name. She was a recurring character last season, but she was searching for her brother throughout the whole season. And of course, she's got her father's Green Lantern ring. So I don't know why we keep calling her Green Lantern's daughter. She technically is the Green Lantern now. She has her father's ring, which, like Courtney's staff, harnesses the power of the light. And last season, there was this whole big debacle about the power of the light versus the power of the darkness. They could only defeat Eclipso by harnessing the power of the light. Whereas someone like the Shed, who was a villain, but then he became a hero, he could not defeat Eclipso because he harnessed the power of darkness, and Eclipso was all about darkness. But last season, something happened to Jennie's ring, and when she tried to, it was to clean up residue, I don't know, from the Shed or from Eclipso, a little bit of the darkness ended up seeping into the Green Lantern ring. So that's causing a lot of issues for her now that she's back. So in this episode, we finally find Jennie's brother, who she was looking for all of last season. He is called Todd. He is the iconic DC character known as Obsidian. Everybody was so excited when they found out he was coming in. This is one of the arcs I mentioned, and I said we haven't heard head nor tail off in the first half of the season. Now it has begun. And we first met Todd. They did a flashback to when we first met Jennie last year and when she first put on the ring and it activated for her. As this was happening, parallel, Todd and his boyfriend were having a happy anniversary dinner. And when the ring activated for Jennie, Todd's eyes went green. But for some reason, instead of him harnessing the power of the light, he turned into like the shadow creature and started sending out shadows, which of course suggests, like the Shed, he's harnessing the power of darkness, which by the way comes from the alternate dimension known as the Shadowlands. We met that last season, and that's where the Shades of Power originates from. So that was the intro to the episode when Todd was then taken by the police to the Helix Institute, where he met what seemed to be a nice woman. The only thing is, we know that this Helix Institute for superpowered people is also run by the entity known as Mr. Bones, who we now think is the person who has been watching everyone in Blue Valley since the murder mystery kicked off. And speaking of the murder mystery, the reason this episode was kind of so dark was because it was all set at nighttime, and it was a very character heavy episode. They used to do these things in the British shops. They still do from time to time. They would be called one-hander episodes, and it would just focus on a couple of characters talking at like 3 a.m. in the morning as the night goes on, and you learn more about the character. This was very much what this episode was like. It was the middle of the night, and they'd come up with a plan for Beth to hack into the power grid and pull the power in Blue Valley, because the person watching them would then lose access to the cameras. So they all had to pretend they didn't know the cameras were there. Luke Wilson was brilliant. He started having them all say grace at the dinner and completely act really, really weird. He kept calling his stepson or his son Michael instead. And everyone was like, come on, Pat, be a bit more realistic. You're really drawing attention to his hair. So they did it. And then as they were like acting as though everything was okay, Beth managed to shut off the power to the whole grid. And then you saw the person watching them, their fist got really, really angry. And the jigsaw they were creating with it had the skeleton face in it. He just smashed it aside. He was really upset that he could no longer say. And then the rest of the episode was about them all purring off into like sections, so many sets of people, and all of them going and pulling the cameras while the power was out. So this person would not know that they knew. Basically, when the power came back on, all the cameras would be gone. So it was a very like slow moving in the very good sense of the word. It was basically about people searching in the dark corners of places, cameras over here, and then having a very powerful conversation about whatever's going on with them. Courtney needed a little bit of reassurance because the JSA no longer trusts her. So it was just her and Pat in their basement where they store the staff in order to find the secret cameras there. Rick, who now has the hourglass, that is no longer an hourglass. It powers him 24/7. I predicted last week that he may start to have some anger issues, and he may start to have like an addiction problem to the hourglass. And that is very much the case here. Him and Beth went into the school to take the cameras there, and he started punching a hole in the wall, pulling the cameras out, everything just to show off his newfound power. And he was getting really angry about it as well. And Beth's starting to get a little bit worried about him. She was like, okay, it's cool that you have this power all the time, but like, why are you so angry? And he was like, wouldn't you want to flex if you had this power? So he was smashing things up, leaving a trail of destruction behind him, which is not a good thing. But when Courtney and Pat were in their basement finding the cameras, all of a sudden they were surrounded by this shadow. And out of it came the Shed, who had finally come back. It was wonderful seeing the reaction online. Everyone loves the Shed. He's our old-fashioned British gentleman who's just looking for a cup of tea. He was a big villain last season, but he's no longer a villain. And he said he just needs Courtney. He doesn't need the staff. Pat wasn't going to let Courtney go with her. So before the Shed disappeared into a shadow with Courtney, Pat joined along, and the three of them disappeared and vanished, which made Barbara, Courtney's mom, and Mike, Pat's son, very worried about the whereabouts. They were like, where are they? And the Shed brought them to underneath the Helix Institute, where Jennie, Green Lantern's daughter, was. And they had a wonderful dynamic, because the Shed is not happy about the fact earlier in the season, when the Shed would do his like disappearing into the shadows thing, you saw little greenish sparks. And now it turns out that him and Jennie's energies are interconnected, and they can't seem to get them unwoven from each other. So he can't use his powers properly, and her ring isn't working properly because the light has been corrupted by the darkness, and the darkness has been corrupted by the light. But long story short, they figured out that they needed Courtney because she knows how to channel the power of the light. And they thought, well, if Courtney overcame Eclipso last season, maybe Courtney can help Jennie overcome the darkness that's buried in her ring and save both her and the Shed. So Courtney said, well, the best way to do that is to save your brother. They went to save Courtney's, or what do you call it, or Jennie's brother. And unfortunately, he said, you can't let me out of this machine that Mr. Bones had trapped him in, because he will destroy the world. But Jennie touched him anyway. The power of the Green Lantern ring made his eyes glow green. There was a huge explosion. And then Jennie's brother, Obsidian, had turned into that giant shadow creature again and started swirling. And the shadow came for Courtney, but Pat in the Shed stepped in its way. When at the end of the episode, they woke up, and Pat and the Shed were now trapped in the Shadowlands with no way of getting home, which is a terrible alternate dimension, which makes you see your worst fare over and over again. It's like basically looks like Blue Valley, but it's black and white. And Courtney was trapped there last season, and now Pat and the Shed are trapped there. And since the Shed's powers are weakened by the Green Lantern ring, he won't be able to get them out. So that's very much where things have left off. It was a very different episode. It was very dark. It was very heavy. It was very character driven. The atmosphere was incredible. It was so nice just to see so many character moments. And I think the thing that was the most poignant about it was Yolanda, Wildcat. In season 1, Cindy had released personal photos of Yolanda around the school, and her parents shunned Yolanda. They treat her like garbage. Instead of saying, oh, this happened to you, they were very much, you brought shame in our family. They're utter garbage, and they've made Yolanda's life a living hell. So now every time she sneaks out to be Wildcat, they're like, are you out seeing boys? What are you doing? And she was like, was actually working a shift at the diner, because she works at the diner. But Yolanda's mom rang the diner and was like, oh, you're actually there this time, because I've been ringing up all week and you haven't been there. What are you really up to? And Yolanda's mother gave her an ultimatum that if she didn't give her phone to show her the messages she's been sending, she'd have to leave the house. So basically, Yolanda's parents kicked her out of her own house. Trash, utter trash. And in a really poignant moment, Yolanda went to Courtney's house. Now, Courtney and Pat are missing at the stage, but Yolanda went to Courtney's house and was like, I know me and Courtney aren't talking at the moment, but basically you're the only family I've got. So Barbara gave her a hug, and of course they welcomed her in. So Yolanda's staying there now. So I feel like that was the most poignant moment of the episode, because Courtney and Yolanda are not on speaking terms. And yet she still saw her as more family than her own family. And that says an awful lot. Her parents are garbage. And I hope they find out that their daughter actually is a superhero, and she's been protecting them from evil shadow demons for the last 2 years. I hope they find that out, because they deserve to know that after the way they've treated her. But yeah, this was a very different episode, very light on the murder mystery, but very much heavy on finding out who is watching them. We don't know if it's Mr. Bones. He seems to be helping Obsidian at the Helix Institute, but at the same time, he's very angry that he can't watch people anymore. So I don't know what he's up to. There's an awful lot of uncertainty at the moment. And the one little thing, because I know we're all on Cindy watch, they said Cindy has left town. So I don't know what's going to happen. Remember, she was the one that made the JSA implode last week. Everyone knows now she's starting to develop lizard skin like her father. Nobody knows what's going to happen. But yeah, it was a very different episode. There's not as many murder mystery threads to pull on that we can usually get into, especially since Cindy's no longer there. But I feel like the next episode is Infinity Inc. Part 2. It's very much going to be the carry on from that. Stargirl always does a part 1 and part 2 midway through its season. So I feel like this will be the more character driven stuff before we get back to the murder mystery after that. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was very nice going into this episode not knowing what to expect. And I see why this was the one that they didn't send through, because it's very much its own contained story. And I can't wait to see where it goes next week.
It sounded heavy, but
Mm-hmm.
also very good. And a really nice introduction for Jennie and Todd
Mm-hmm.
for this part of the story. I do wonder though if Cindy will be back, or if it's going to be one of those ones where like she's gone for like the majority of the back half of the season. She's back in the finale.
Yeah. I feel like it could go one of two ways, and then A, she'll come back to prove herself at the end and help the JSA defeat whoever the bad guy is, or B, there'll be another character centric episode where someone goes to track her down, maybe Courtney and Yolanda or something, and goes to track her down and says they're sorry for the way they've behaved and they understand and they want to help her. I feel like it could go one of either way, but I can't wait for her to come back, because I will say the one downside to this episode is she has such a like presence about her, and that was definitely missing in this episode. So I can't wait for her to return.
So hopefully she comes running back. Because she's gonna have to solve the dragon skin thing anyway, and
Mm-hmm.
and that's just she's just gonna adapt to it. And this is just what her skin looks like now.
Yeah, she's going to bring chaos with her one way or another. And I honestly, we're counting down the days until it happens.
It's what she does. Everyone should just accept it by now, as long as it's chaos for good, not
Yeah, yeah.
chaos for evil.
Love Cindy for who she is.